Hey everybody, welcome to tutorial number 6. In today's video I will be showing you how to create different point of views within your vehicle by placing cameras around, and then we'll make a little function to allow the player to cycle through those different point of views. Also, I'll be showing you a little more about how I did the chasing camera, which is the camera that is fixed behind the car with a little bit of movement so it doesn't look so static. I will also make videos in the future about other point of views, such as first-person driving, again with movements in it to replicate head movement when you're turning and braking and all that, and allowing the player to look left and right. I also should eventually make an orbit camera to allow the player to look around the car with the mouse while steering with the keyboard, but today I'll just make the function to allow you to switch through the cameras and the chase camera, just so you have at least one at the end of this video. So first of all, let's see what that's going to look like when we're done. So this is the standard chase camera. You can see it rotates a little bit when you turn. The car gets closer and further away with accelerating and braking. Nothing too fancy, but I think it looks pretty good. Now if you press V, this is a cockpit view. Steering wheel not yet animated, nor is the driver. If you press V again, you got the hood, which the camera is really low to the ground and it's got a really high field of view, so it really gives a good impression of speed. And lastly, we have the fender view, which I'm not a big fan of, but apparently it's a must-have for a racing game, so oh boy. Okay, so let's get to work and make this happen. First, let me delete my Porsche blueprint. Put in the one I use for the tutorials. Now that one I removed the sounds and the UI just to avoid distractions. Also, it doesn't have any cameras, no inputs, no nothing. So we'll be starting from scratch, and I can really show you the whole process. Now if you open the blueprint, you can see right there, we still have all of the skid, emitters, the driver, and that's it. So let's add our first camera. Just a regular camera here. Let's name it actually anything you want. For the chase camera, I like to use a spring arm. The spring arm is going to allow us to have a bit of a radius turn. Now again, you can mess with the spring arm as much as you like. You can actually minimize that here, and you can see in the viewport what the camera sees, so you can move it and adjust it like that. Now I've done this before, so I know already the values I want to give it here are 87. Let's leave that at 0 for the X. I know the length of the spring arm, I like to use 450. I also like let me see here, the angle I believe was -7 on the Y. And for the camera, let's make a 2-degree angle. See what that looks like. Could be a little higher. How about 5? Looks good enough. Let's hit the play button here. Now you have your very static camera that is kind of glued behind the car, not moving, not really doing much. V key doesn't do anything. So that's your first point of view. Let's add a few more. So we can select that camera and duplicate it, or we can just create a new one, doesn't matter. I'm going to call that one cockpit camera. Now if you want to use the same trick to adjust its position, you're going to have to select the chase camera, find the auto activate, untick it, and so when you make that smaller, the only active camera is the cockpit camera, and you can move it around and see what it's going to look like in real time. Let's go with this for now. Again, you can duplicate that to create the hood camera, or the bumper camera actually. Again, select the cockpit camera, untick auto activate, go back to the bumper camera, adjust its location. I think something like this makes a lot of sense. I tend to like that point of view because the lower you go to the ground, the more you're gonna get that feeling of speed because of the ground texture kind of flying away. You can also accentuate that by adjusting the field of view of that camera, which you can't really do with the chase camera, because if you adjust the field of view too much, it's going to deform the car and it's gonna look awful. You can do it to some extent, but not nearly as much as you can with the bumper camera. So just for good measure, I'll be setting that to 130. We can always come back and play with it later. And lastly, I will be setting up a camera here on the fender. Well, more like the door, looking at the fender, but whatever. Duplicate that bumper camera again. Let's call it door camera. Set the field of view back to 90, otherwise it's gonna look really funny. Again, bumper camera, you will untick auto active, select the door camera, make sure it is active, and adjust its position. You can also rotate it. Let's make it a little higher. Okay, let's call that good enough for now. And now that we have all of our cameras positioned, let's go back here. You can untick auto activate. So all of the cameras are gonna have the auto activate checkbox unchecked, except for the chase camera. Now let's go into the event graph. Actually first let us set up an input to be able to switch between these cameras. You're gonna want to go to edit, project setting, find the input right here within engine input. Now you have two categories of inputs. You're gonna have the action mapping, which is basically like jump when you press the space bar, which is just basically an on-off key. And you have your axis mappings, which you're gonna use for the mouse, for a gamepad, anything that is graded, if you can say that, anything that isn't just 0 or 1. For toggling through the cameras, we're gonna have an action mapping. I've already got one set up. I've called it view change. I've set it to be using the V key, so you can go ahead and do that. Now again, we're going to right click anywhere in the graph, find our view change action event. That's what we're going to be using. Then we are going to need a variable to know which camera we're currently seeing through. New variable here, camera index. I will make that an integer. We're gonna get that variable, drag off of it, go into, I believe it's utilities, flow control. Here's a switch on int. And there you can execute different actions depending on that integer variable. So we have 4 cameras, so we're going to need 4 outputs from 0 to 3. And then we are going to set that camera index. If we're on index 0, we set it to 1, so on and so forth for the others. If we're at 1, we set to 2. If we're at 2, we set it to 3. And if we're on 3, we set it back to 0. Okay. Now what we're gonna do, I'm trying to think of a way to keep that kind of clean and readable as I'm going. So we're going to get a reference to all of our cameras, drag those into the graph, make them a little smaller, and we are going to get a set active, plug all of them into it, like so. Make sure the new active is unchecked, put that somewhere around here. So now it looks kind of funny because we're deactivating all of the cameras, and then here, depending on which camera index we're onto, we're going to activate just one of them. So again, let's copy and paste all of the references to our cameras. Go ahead and again set active, unplug the target here, drag off of it and type in select, and it's already by default using an integer. So now again we have only 2 inputs, we need 4. We are going to plug in our cameras in the same order, very important, and use our camera index variable here, like so. And make sure to check the new active. Now all of these will go into the set active. Actually, I wonder if I can just use the default here. Let's make a quick test that I probably should have done off camera first. Let's see if that works. Nope. Alright, so that pin is basically useless, for us at least. And we're going to want to drag off all of these into the set active. Now let's try that. Something is off. I don't really like that order. I usually would go with chase camera as option 0, because that's the one that's enabled by default. And then I would go with cockpit next, then bumper, and then door for the last one. Okay, that should be better. So just to recap here, whenever we press V, we deactivate all the cameras. Then we grab the current camera index, which is going to be 0 when you first play the game. This is 0, so we make it 1, and then we activate a camera that we're selecting here. First one is going to be option 1, this is cockpit. So you start the game with the chase camera, you press V for the first time, and you go into cockpit, and the camera index is now 1 instead of 0. So the next time you press V, you're going to wind up here. You're going to make it 2, which is going to be our bumper camera. So let's test that again. And that's better. You can see it's very snappy though, so I like to add a little fade in and out. And the way we're going to do that is using the camera manager. Let's make some room here. We're gonna get a player controller, player camera manager. Okay. And we will search for a start camera fade. We're gonna plug that in before we deactivate the cameras. And from alpha 0 to 1, the duration here I like half a second. Color should be black, and you should fade the audio as well. Although you don't have to. Again, you can play around with these. You can fade to a different color. You can fade in a different time. but this is just the default values I'm going to be using to show you how it works. And when you've done that, at the very end of all, when you've reactivated one specific camera, you're going to grab these two, copy and paste them here, and then you're going to look for stop. Actually, no. Sorry, I'm confused. You can copy and paste the whole thing and just swap those numbers here. Now from alpha 1 to alpha 0. And that should give you your little fade in and out when you switch cameras. There you go. Much better. Let's make that a little longer just so you can see the effect better. Let's make it 1 second instead of 0.5. And that is your camera switching function. Go ahead and collapse that to a function. Collapse to function just because it's cleaner. I'm gonna call it switch camera. You can call it whatever you want. As you can see, I like to collapse things to functions. That makes for a much cleaner graph, a lot easier to read, especially when making tutorials about it. And now that we've done this, the only thing that's left to do is to really give that chase camera some interesting movements. And we're gonna do that. Let me check here for a second. First thing we're gonna do actually is again drag off that camera index, use another switch, and again our 4 outputs, and we're only going to be using the output 0 for now. Output 0 is the chase, output 1 is the cockpit, 2 is bumper, and 3 is the door. And so when you want to implement camera controls, you're going to implement them here, so you're only controlling the camera you're viewing through and not controlling all 4 of them at the same time for no reason, just for performance reasons. And let's immediately make that a function before I forget about it. So collapse to function, that would be camera input. Okay. Now that we've established that we want to modify the chase camera only, the very first thing you can do to create an effect of speed is to change the field of view, but again not too much, otherwise you're going to be deforming the car. So grab your chase camera here, drop it in the graph, you can drag off of it, look for set field of view. Now you're going to need a map range. I like to use clamped just to be sure those variables don't get out of control. Now outrange A is going to be the default 90, and I'm going to go up to 110 when we reach around top speed. So in range from 0 to 100, and the value here, that's going to be governed by the speed we're going at. And so we're going to need to determine what speed we're going at. So if we go back into the event graph here, we don't actually have anything for that. Okay. Now unless you have these, I made these at the very beginning of that tutorial series. If you don't have them, I'm basically just dragging off the component list here, getting the vehicle movement, then casting it to chaos wheeled vehicle movement, and then dragging off of that and promoting it to a variable. Because that variable here, once you've cast it, you have access to more functions and variables than just getting the component. So we're going to be using that variable here a lot. Go back to the camera input. You want to get that variable that we've created. Get movement component variable. You want to get the speed. Get forward speed mile per hour. And that is what we're going to plug in right here. If we just compile and save that, we can test. You can see the field of view is very, very subtle. That's done on purpose. You can see it better when you brake. So that's going to be that for the field of view. Then we can start playing around with the rotation of the spring arm. So again, select your spring arm. You should probably name that. You're probably going to have more than one spring arm at some point. You should probably name that. Same as the camera, so chase, spring arm. Go back to the camera input, grab it, put it in the graph somewhere, and we're gonna set its relative rotation. We are going to get its relative rotation also, just to know where it's at right now. Now for the new rotation, we're going to make a rinterp, just like so. This is the current, that's why it's important to have it. The target I'm going to split into X, Y, and Z. Delta time here needs to be get world delta second. And again, the interp speed can be whatever you want. I am going to set mine to 3. And so I'll be modifying the roll and the yaw, not the pitch, although you could make the camera pitch lower with speed if you want. Not gonna do that right now. Gonna keep it sort of simple. So again, we are going to need the speed here, which we can plug into a map range, clamped. Let's say speed from 1 mile per hour to, again, not 100, maybe something more like 45 miles an hour. Let's set it to 1 and 0.5. Because this is going to be a multiplier for the steering angle. That's how I'm going to decide what the yaw angle should be. Steering angle, we have a variable here because we've set it in a previous tutorial about the steering method. Now if you don't have that one, it's going to be quite different. Luckily we do have it, so that's going to make it easy. You're just going to get the steering angle, multiply it. It's probably a good idea to clamp it before you plug that into the rotation. Not actually a map range, just a clamp. clamp float here. Let's go ahead and put in something like -45 and 45. Because the steering angle is 70. Because it's a drift car. So you don't want the camera to be going like 70 degrees left and right. Well, you could, but I wouldn't personally do that. So let's have a look at that, see what that looks like right now. And you can see the camera is following the steering. That gives us a little bit of sideways motion. You can also tell I forgot something here. The camera is really low to the ground. That is because I forgot to plug in some pins. I'm only putting the yaw in here. And so the pitch and roll are 0. Now the pitch I'm not going to modify, so I'll just look into the spring arm. I'll set it to -7. I'll just do that again here to make sure it stays the same. Let's look at it again. Now you've got the camera switching as well. And you can see when drifting, that camera yaw looks pretty good. Now there's other things you could do, like adjusting the roll of the camera and also the length of the spring arm, or actually offset the position of the spring arm depending on the acceleration of the car to fake some camera momentum, to kind of separate the camera from the car a little bit. Be careful not to overdo it and make your players motion sick. That's a real thing. And also I'm not gonna do that in this video, because that would make for a super long tutorial. And so I'm gonna have to make separate videos, like I said before, for every different camera view to kind of develop them more in depth. And so for now, this is what I'm gonna show you. Yeah, save now. So yeah, you now have a sort of good looking chase camera and other cameras you can switch to. And so that concludes it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Please consider subscribing. Also check the video description for the link to the Discord server. And I will see you next time.